I want to watch this video with you guys because I have some opinions on this mentality. And the TLDR is that I don't really agree with the that way of looking at the game. And let me explain what my thought process is, right? So I think options is good, but I think the idea of buffing over nerfing is bad, because say that you have your game, right? And in your game you have all sorts of power levels. So let's look at like a Smash Ultimate tier list. Let's look at like, God, some of these are horrible. I don't even need to look at them. Let's look at the compiled tier list from r/Smash Bros. So this is fine, this works. Alright, that didn't help. Okay, so taking something like this, I can tell you that all of these characters, and possibly even these characters, so if we take the pen, I actually forgot to get my pen. Hang on just 1 second. There you go. So I'll tell you, these characters are not fun to play against. No one likes playing versus Snake. No one likes getting comboed by Pikachu, or, you know, missing moves because he's too small. No one likes getting fucked by Arsene. No one likes getting 2-framed by forward smash. No one likes Palutena's back air. No one likes Pichu doing 70% in one combo. No one likes playing versus these characters. So when you talk about a balanced metagame, you usually want every character to be like viable, right? And to me, that's talking about, when you talk about buffing characters, I think buffing characters to be similar in power level to like these characters is a bad idea for game balance. Let's look at the characters a tier below. So maybe that's an extreme example. So let's look at these characters, right? No one likes Ivysaur. No one likes Charizard. Very few people like Squirtle. I feel like Pokemon Trainer is honestly one of the more fun top tiers or high tiers to play against because it's so varied. But like the individual Pokemon, no one likes playing versus them. No one likes how broken Inkling's back air is and how he cannot hit her when she's dashing. No one likes Warrior's Waft. No one likes Zero Suit. No one likes Wolf down smash 2-framing or like a Blaster neutral. I think people don't mind Fox too much because you kind of body him when he's in disadvantage. But you get the idea. So no one likes playing as these characters. Now when you look at like the mid tiers, I think a lot of people are a lot more okay with playing versus a lot of these characters. So I know a lot of people hate Banjo, but I think Banjo is fine, right? I think he has very defined strengths and weaknesses. Even if you look at a tier above that, I know this is outdated, so like you can ignore some of these picks, but a lot of people don't mind playing versus Ike. A lot of people don't mind playing versus Link. Pokemon Trainer is fun to fight when you're not on Squirtle. Yeah, so you see, like people dislike a lot of these top tiers. A lot of players don't mind playing versus Falco. Luigi's kind of degenerate. But I feel like a lot of these characters are a lot more fun to play against. So what does that tell me? That tells me that a character is fun to play against when they have enough strengths to be viable. So these characters are obviously not bad. But they also have weaknesses that you can capitalize on. Because when they have meaningful weaknesses, your game plan is going to feel very, very nice to execute. So if you're playing versus a Palutena, for example, you might put her in the corner and then her bullshit options get her out of the corner. The same kind of goes for Pikachu. Joker down guns out of the corner. Wario wafts you regardless, you know, or he uses airspeed or his bike. So a lot of these characters have like a lot of ways to compensate for their supposed weaknesses. So I feel like if you look at like the ideal power of a character, it would be in like this range. So these are characters that feel good because they have an ideal power fantasy. So if you look at a character, like I said, this is like an outdated tier list, so it's pretty hard to say. But if you look at like a character like Meta Knight or Mewtwo, they don't feel good to play. Because there's like a power fantasy attached to Meta Knight, which is like you're a combo monster, but you cannot really fulfill the power fantasy. Or you're like Mewtwo, who has like this great control over the neutral, very fast, very strong hitboxes, but he's very light, so you're kind of, you know, threading the needle. So a lot of these styles don't come to fruition. The same goes for like Robin, very clear example. As well something like Ridley. Like, you can try playing to their strengths, and that's fine, but at the end of the day, you're going to get bodied for their weaknesses. So you need to design your characters to have very well-defined strengths and very well-defined weaknesses. And of course, some characters' strengths are that they're like a jack of all trades. Like Link, Young Link, for example, or even Link. They have like long-range options. They have a lot of different options in their kit, but then they have very defined weaknesses to kind of compensate for that. So I think when you try to balance your characters, you want to have characters that are very well-defined strengths and weaknesses. And I feel like the characters in the top have very well-defined strengths and very hard to capitalize on weaknesses. So that's why I think the buff, not nerf mentality is actually kind of shitty. Like if I designed Smash, I would nerf all of these characters. They would all get nerfed. They would all get nerfed. And like, of course it's not all of them because this tier list is outdated. I would buff all of these. And then the ideal power level is somewhere in the middle. So someone actually asked me about this, so that's why I loaded up the video. I actually haven't, it's been a really long time since I've seen this because this video is like more than 3 years old. But yeah. People who argue that Wolf shouldn't get nerfed often play top tiers themselves. But I think in general, when you buff everyone, you kind of get must not be a fan of Marvel 2. So I feel like I really like Marvel 3. I haven't played Marvel 2, so I cannot really judge. But I feel like Marvel 3 was fun because of the team building aspect. I feel like the gameplay itself kind of had issues. I haven't watched it yet, but the title doesn't suggest not nerfing at all. And there are more mid-slash low tier than top tier, so it makes sense to buff more. So I get that. But I feel like a lot of people are like, no, don't buff Wolf and don't buff Lucina. You should don't nerf them. You should buff other characters to get to that level. And that is something that I disagree with. Because when they are at that level, I mean, sure, they're more fun to play because you're more powerful, and being powerful is fun. But it's going to be that much less fun to play against them. And I feel like a very important aspect of the longevity of a game is how fun it is to play against your characters. Yeah, I don't think buffing characters to that level makes for a very fun game. And it kind of makes for like a Melee-esque game, where in Melee, a lot of what defines Melee until you get like to the top level is how well you play your own character. In Melee, because your character is so strong and because your weaknesses are so your weaknesses are not too important. There's a lot of ways to compensate for weaknesses if you know your character. The game focuses a lot on how well do you capitalize on your character until everyone does, which is like the top level, and only then does mind games matter. And I don't think that makes for a very fun game. And that makes for characters that are not fun to play against.
In the lifespan of nearly every competitive game, there comes a player that's so dominant that they ruin it for everyone. The man who broke basketball was Lakers legend George Mikan. At 6 feet 10 inches, his unbeatable defensive strategy was to stand near the basket and stop any shot that was about to go in. You might be surprised that there wasn't already a goaltending rule in place, but before the 1940s, the thought of anybody able to reach high enough to goaltend was unfathomable. A Twitter account following fighting gamers knows that having a fruitful conversation about character balance can be difficult.
That's very true.
It's no surprise given how subjective and personal it is. It's hard to state your opinions on fairness without looking biased, and if you do,
Chun-Li was stupid in this game.
This is about the time when someone steps in and says, adapt. Not only does adapt make for a badass t-shirt, it's a powerful attitude that shows how...
See? Oh, it's a bit quiet. I'll turn it up. Oh. I actually think adapt it's a good mindset to have, right? So, Esam talks about this a lot, and I actually agree with him in the sense that if you're a competitor, then what you want to do in the game if you're a competitor is to maximize your chances of winning. And the first step to maximizing your chances of winning is to objectively analyze what's going on. So when you're busy complaining, you're obviously not looking at it too objectively. That said, and I speak from personal experience, I think it's possible to both complain and try to adapt and get better. So, I think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy where between like adapting and whining, because you can adapt and you can whine. Because some things are bullshit, and I feel like talking about that can be fruitful, even if it's whining. Especially when someone challenges you to kind of specify what about that move or tactic or character that you find bullshit. because that's going to allow you to more accurately analyze what's going wrong and, you know, build up your counters towards it. But yeah, I mean, that's a step beyond whining, of course, but it can lead into each other. That's what I mean,
how resilient
basically.
you are in the face of any challenge. And that was precisely the attitude of the Fort Wayne Pistons when faced with Mikan and the Lakers. Their strategy against the most OP player in basketball was to make a quick lead early on and play keep away from the other team until the time ran out. It worked, and the Pistons beat the Lakers 19-18 in the lowest scoring game in NBA history.
Okay, so this is another thing, right? It's actually something that we deal with in Smash as well, because unlike normal fighting games, which this video is like about because it's Core A gaming, we actually have rule sets. So this has been a topic many times. It's like, how much should we rebalance the game with the rules that we decide? So there's a thing about like stages, right? So a lot of people, like Mewtwo King at the start of this game was like, we need more small stages because we have too many large stages. And then the question is, do we want a rule set that's going to rebalance the game to have more longevity? Because a more balanced rule set is going to lead to more longevity. I mean, that much is for certain. Or do we just legalize every stage that passes the should be legal criteria and kind of let the meta figure out itself, right? Because if you're entirely objective about this, then you wouldn't want to rebalance the game with your stage list, because, I mean, at that point, there's so much more that you can rebalance, right? Why stop at the stage list? Why not give Lucario a 20% handicap because he's a low tier or a mid tier or whatever you think he is? I think he's good, but, you know. I think it's a slippery slope. That's why I think, like, for something like stages or other rules, it's all about, is something competitive and not is something fun or not. But on the other hand, I get the argument that you want to legalize things that are fun because of longevity and because of player base. Personally, I'm like a purist in this regard, but I don't mind either side of the argument. And working reactively, which, yeah, exactly. So I agree with that. I think legalizing a lot of stuff and then seeing what doesn't work is a really good approach. So Skyloft is an example, right? I think Skyloft still has an argument to be a good legal stage. I think a lot of stages still have an argument. I think Unova still has an argument to be a legal stage, but no one talks about that. I'm a little sad that Yoshi's Triplat is not legal in the Netherlands. I think that is very clearly, a legal stage. Because, like, okay, so my criteria is, like, is something uncompetitive? And I think something like Light is uncompetitive because it adds an element of pseudo randomness, in my opinion. And I think, like, Skyloft has some issues as well with especially the blast zone on the left side. I think that's, like, the main reason why it shouldn't be legal. But like a stage like, what's the hero stage? The altar, I think it's called, something like that. I think that is potentially a legal stage as well, even though it's like huge. Yggdrasil, exactly. Yggdrasil, potentially good as well. So some things are anti-competitive, and I think those things should be banned. But I think there should be like a clear list of criteria, and then we should ban based on the criteria. Rather than anything else. You can't legalize any asymmetrical stage. Yeah, I get that argument. So that's the random port priority, or like the randomness. So sometimes you spawn in a good position, sometimes you spawn in a bad position. So I can see that. I think for a larger state like Mementos, it doesn't really matter too much, but who knows. But yeah, so that's the thing about rebalancing the game. So another example is like ledge grab limit. So ledge grab limit, technically nothing anti-competitive about it, but it is not fun, right? So do we prioritize fun over competitiveness? It's a very slippery slope.
Of course, this was only possible because there was no shot clock at the time, and as you might have guessed, this is why they made one. In the end, the goaltending rule nerfed Mikan, but the shot clock rule actually buffed him by making the teams have to deal with him. Why would they make a rule that benefits Mikan? Because the ultimate goal of nerfing and buffing isn't to balance, but to make a game that's fun to play and watch. People...
See, now, that's where opinions differ. So what makes a game fun to watch, right? So that's why I also think, like, not every character needs to be the same power level, right? Because it's cool to see an underdog win. And a lot of people like playing underdog characters. So a perfectly balanced game is not fun. And I don't think a perfectly balanced game is good. I do think that... that's a clean Python shot. I know, this is horrible. So I think imbalance is a good thing for a game, right? Because players want imbalance. As much as people talk about how balanced the game is, people want imbalance. I just think... I think the most important thing to me is that characters aren't too strong. I don't mind characters being so weak that they cannot realistically win in tournaments. Because there will still be characters that play... people that play those characters. So, like, people will still play the bad characters and have fun with them, and that's fine. So those characters accomplish what they want because they give the player what the player wants. But when characters are too good, then they simply become unfun to play against. And I think that is a very, very hard... a very, very tough sell for me. Yeah. So I think what he says is you want to make a game fun, which increases the longevity, and it's gonna, you know, keep people playing. People don't play games because they're balanced. People play games because they're fun. But I think balance leads to more fun. So that's my opinion. I almost quit Smash Ultimate because I think the strong characters are so strong that I didn't have fun in the game. And I was playing Pokemon Trainer. The character being bad but still being complete is perfectly fine. Yeah, so that's entirely it. Do you not feel 4's top tiers were more polarizing too? No. So I feel like the thing about 4 is that in 4, though the top tiers were strong, I feel like Bayonetta, for example, like Bayonetta, people will call her like the most broken character ever. I think she was fine because her neutral was still lacking. So she had a very clear weakness to focus on. I think Cloud was actually the least fun to play because his weakness was low disadvantage bat, and then because he's on the heavier side and he has amazing airspeed and his limit stays forever, his disadvantage is actually pretty workable. And you don't really abuse a bad disadvantage as much as you can abuse like weaknesses in neutral game or in or weaknesses in game plan. So his bad disadvantage is actually not a weakness in his game plan. It's just kind of something that comes naturally. Like every character naturally gets into disadvantage. For him, it was just a little bit worse. So Meta Knight is a good example. So Meta Knight was extremely polarizing. It was not fun to play against because he had no real weaknesses. His main weakness was that it was lighter than other characters. So you need to hit him less than he needs to hit you. Which is a shitty weakness. Just like Cloud. Cloud's weakness was a shitty weakness. A well-balanced game in terms of power levels can still be fun to watch because you still experience the underdog aspect through things like matchup. Yeah, so that's another thing. I think a balanced game is a game where most characters are solo viable despite there being a set of top tiers they don't dominate the meta. Yeah, so that's one way to look at it. I think the thing about balance is that I feel like balance should not be too meta defined and more like designed. So the meta game is not something you can design when you're developing a game. But you can design a character to have the right options and the right weaknesses. And a good example of that is Palutena. So they designed Palutena to have a weakness in that her shield game is really bad. So she has no up smash out of shield, she has no up B out of shield, her arrows out of shield are all subpar. So her shield is really bad. And then they designed her so that she had shield normals to compensate for that. So she has other ways to beat attacks than holding shield. And then they gave her a shit ton of speed as well, so that she doesn't even need to use her shield. And altogether, she now has a weakness in that her shield is bad, but she has so many fucking ways to deal with it that it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Right? And there will be situations in which you force her to shield, and you will be able to, you know, capitalize on the fact that it's weaker than other shields. It's, in my opinion, it's just not fun. Because first you have to win like 2 different interactions just to get her in that position where she actually has to shield. Because she has so much shit that prevents her from having to shield. And only then do you play a rock, paper, scissors scenario that is in your favor. And I think that's absolutely bullshit. So that's like poor balancing in my opinion. So just give her a weakness. This frustration is deep-rooted, I can tell. Yeah, so I like playing mid-range characters. I like playing mid-range characters. And Palutena literally just says, fuck every mid-range character in the game. And that's not fun. Like, that's just straight up not fun. I'm spacing my back air, she's spacing her back air. I outspace her, she wins. I'm setting up pressure in mid-range, she just runs up and dash attacks. She wins. Right? So, I feel like that's bad design. I think Joker is bad design as well, but for entirely different reasons. So yeah, I think Smash 4's top tiers were arguably more polarizing, but they had better defined weaknesses. So Diddy, for example, Diddy had a very you had a very clear game plan versus Diddy. First, you get rid of his banana, and then you capitalize on the fact that he needs to pluck one. There was Mewtwo, who had a lot of issues because of his bad dash grab, which means that sorry, I'll get to your question in a second. He had a really bad dash grab, which means that you could play the burst range very well versus him, and usually have an advantage. You had Sonic, whose main move was inverse disjointed, so it was actually smaller than his hurt box, which means it lost to everything. And then it was also he also had no mix up against shield, so there was a lot of ways to bait it out. And then he was put in a bad scenario, and then you can try to capitalize on that scenario. And in the worst case scenario, you just get back to neutral. So there was a lot of game plans, because a lot of these players, Liquid Morris, hey man, what's up? So a lot of these characters, they had very clear character tools, right? So character tools and character weaknesses. And I feel like in Smash Ultimate, because the system mechanics are better, so everyone has a stronger baseline, and then the individual tools were nerfed, so there were so there was less extreme peaks and throws. So all in all the tools kind of get normalized, and rather than capitalizing on a character's strengths and weaknesses, you're busy capitalizing on system mechanics. I disagree with no mix-ups on shields when he has SDSC. Yeah, so that's fair enough. I feel like based on my experience with Sonic, and I feel like I have a lot because at the end of the day I did beat Peli, Aperture, Ixis. The main way you deal with Sonic is that you kind of go into his unreactable range, then dash out of his unreactable range, hit shield, and if he spin dash cancels, then you lost nothing. And if he releases his shield, he has to do something to compensate for that situation, because it was a bad situation for Sonic. And then he can do stuff like jump out, spring, jump out, go to a platform, dash through you, stop in front of your shield. And those were all good mix-ups on shield, but they were not winning. It was not a winning situation. So it was a very clear game plan to, that he tried to do to capitalize on his strengths, and you try to do to capitalize on his weaknesses. Sonic was actually really bad in the air. So that's one thing. So I think the fun part of balancing is making sure that characters aren't too strong. So when characters are too strong, the game becomes less fun. So that's why I think nerfing strong characters is more important for a game's longevity than buffing weak characters. Ultimate Pikachu. I think Ultimate Pikachu is a very well-rounded character. But their weakness is that they are light, their kill power is limited, it's kind of gated between very specific setups. And because they are so stubby, this means that they often put themselves in danger of dying early to a medium read in a lot of scenarios.
People wanted to watch him play basketball, not professional hot potato. I think focusing on balance too much can hurt a game in a similar way to how focusing on money too much can lead to an unhappier life. Business scholars call this medium maximization, which Raj Raghunathan describes as the propensity to forget all about the end goal one wants to achieve and to pursue instead the means or mediums to that end goal. Just like how money is worthless by itself because it's paper and metal, balance is also worthless by itself. Street Fighter 1 is the only Street Fighter to be perfectly balanced, but it's boring because you can only play as two characters who fight exactly the same. Obviously, this isn't the 5-5 utopia everyone's imagining, and it's because we want to see a diverse set of characters and movesets. Balance updates are ways to increase the frequency of underrepresented characters and reduce overrepresented ones, but there are different ways of going about this. One way is to buff the weak. Buffs are exciting and fun, and it's why we have Marvel.
Yeah, so this is Marvel 1.
Awesome, it kind of feels like a Faustian bargain that'll bite us in the ass later if we wish for too much. But I thought about it, and the worst thing that can happen if everybody gets way too buffed is this.
Alright, so I don't know what this example is going to come down to, but this does not look like fun. I would never play this shit competitively. Blanca is just flying across the screen. You cannot react to shit. This looks like a fucking coin toss. And sure, this is fun to play with your friends on like an evening, but I don't think this is a very good competitive formula.
This
What
is
the
a
fuck?
hacked version of Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition made by Hungshi Enterprise Taiwan, and it was called Street Fighter 2 Rainbow Edition. You've got homing fireballs, instant teleports, unlimited air specials, shape-shifting, and yoga flames coming out of knees. Basically, every character got buffed to the point of absurdity, and while it's a pretty dumb game, it was kind of fun, and I remember dropping in some quarters to play it back in the day. Where else can you do hands Hadoken into jab, teleport, cross-up, standing fierce?
What the fuck?
The game might have been dumb, but it innovated many of the fighting game concepts we see today. Rainbow Edition was actually the catalyst that inspired Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting.
Rainbow Edition is
which
so
also
insane. It
featured
really is.
Faster speed, air specials, a teleport for Dalsum, a fireball for Chun-Li, and a sales figure of over 4 million copies on the SNES alone. The reason why Rainbow Edition was so interesting and influential wasn't because they just made everyone do more damage and move faster. It was because they gave the characters new abilities and new options. Now just imagine what it would be like if instead of Rainbow Edition, they made a hack called Gray Edition where everybody was nerfed to absurdity.
Okay, so I get the point, right? So nerfing, I don't think nerfing everyone is the right way to go, and I don't think buffing everyone is the right way to go either. I think the point is buffing more than nerfing is not the right addition. I think the right attitude to have. I think the best thing to do is to make sure that every character has well-defined strengths and weaknesses and can play to a power fantasy that has a cost. So there has to be a cost to it that's very tangible.
No more specials, no more combos, no more throwing. We've actually already played this game in 1984. It was called Karate Champ, and it's one of the most honest and balanced fighting games ever made. Nerfing is a good tool for balancing, but it's no secret people generally don't like it. Even Capcom has acknowledged this in a PowerPoint slide that's been floating around last year. But why do we dislike nerfs so much even if we understand it's meant to balance the game? Well, psychologically, humans and even apes are prone to what's known as loss aversion. Loss aversion is a theory that suggests that losses hurt twice as much as gains feel good. For example, imagine I offer you to play a game of heads or tails where if it lands on tails, you lose $10. How much money would you have to win on heads for you to be willing to play this game?
It's like 30.
Psychologists found that people would accept
20.
a challenge starting at $20 for winning, which is exactly twice the amount you could lose. This suggests that one nerf on your character will hurt twice as bad as one buff of similar caliber will feel good. The human tendency to be loss averse is used by marketing all the time. Why are sales of limited editions so effective? Because missing out hurts, which is why you gotta get that Strawberry Christmas Karen DLC before the season's over. While it can be argued that nerfing is a necessary evil to prevent the game from breaking, there are creative ways to do this that can improve the game instead of just making everyone depressed. One of the most hype-inducing changes I've seen was actually a nerf. During the life of Street Fighter 4, Ryu's Shoryuken was altered many times. Originally, you could cancel any version of the Shoryuken by sacrificing 2 bars of meter to make yourself safe in opponent blocked. But after a few patches, they removed the ability to cancel the heavy version, which is the one that did the most damage. While this seems like a bummer on the surface, it gave players the option to do a safe but weaker version, or a risky but damaging version. When you had the resources to cancel, but opted for the high damage version, you were telling your opponent that you're not scared and you figured them out.
I mean, there's making a statement, and then
Yeah, so now he's making a case. Yeah, FADC was really funny. They're talking about why nerfing is better than buffing. So I agree with this. So this is what I was talking about. You need to add a cost to the power that you attach to characters. So Ryu has a power Shoryuken, but there needs to be like a cost attached to having, using that move. So either you spend resources, in which case the opponent, still gets a win, or you go for the risky version. So I feel like this is a good way to nerf, right? And I feel like this is applicable to a lot of games. Like, because a lot of the strong characters, when they are too strong, in my opinion, is because they don't have, very well-defined weaknesses. In other words, their decision-making has less depth because they have less negatives to play around. And I think that's generally true. Like, there are complicated characters that have very complicated decision-making, but in general, like the top tiers are often top tiers because their tools are just that strong. Like, they cover so many options. And doing something like this makes it cover less options, which increases decision making. What characters would you describe as too simple? So, like, I can take Shulk, for example. So Shulk is one of the most complicated characters in the game. But when you're on the ledge and Shulk is ledge trapping you, he just devolves into a forward air spam bot. So that's way too simple. So I would nerf that and make more decision making in that type of scenario take place. But I think Peach and Daisy are very simple. I think Joker is actually on the more complex side of the spectrum. But because he gets out of disadvantage so easily, it actually means that even if you put him in disadvantage, it's not that big of a deal. So the weight of the decision gets reduced a lot. Is it wrong to have a simple game plan though? No, it's not wrong, but it is wrong when a simple game plan is the strongest, like one of the strongest characters in the game. Because at that point, I should put it this way. It's not about being simple, it's about being overpowering. So if it's simple because your tools, like Mario for example. So Mario in Smash 4, in Smash Ultimate it's a little bit different, but Smash 4, right? In Mario, in Smash 4, he had a few tools, so it's very simple, but they were hard to apply properly. So you had a simple kit, but it was hard to do well. But then, say that Mario was like the best character in the game, or say you would win with Bayonetta just by doing heel slide in neutral. I actually think that is a very fun game style. It's not about the simplicity. It's about the dominance of options. So if one option covers 10 other options, it's a strong option. And that makes your game plan simple because there's no reason to use your other options. But with Mario, when one option has like really high risk and reward, but it is pretty specific still, then you get some fun interactions while still keeping the game plan simple. Is it wrong if they're just one of the strongest though? Well, I think so because I don't think it's fun. I don't think it's fun to play against. And I understand that's my opinion. But it kind of ties back into what we talked about. You want to challenge your players to think about the right option. Exactly. So you can have a simple character, like Ike. Like Ike is a simple character, but Ike has to do a lot of like player-to-player reads to make his game plan work. So that's I think Ike is an interesting character in that he has very defined weaknesses, very defined strengths, but still a very simple game plan. I think if his Nair was like 10 times bigger, then he would still be simple, but it wouldn't be fun. So complex and strong is a lot more fun because there's more counterplay, there's more interaction than simple and strong. If that makes sense. So I think simple is fine. I just think that simple and strong is often a recipe for disaster. A simple character could end up predictable, right? So that's what I'm saying. If you have a simple character with, a simple character has, per definition, limited options that they get to apply in a lot of different ways, right? So a limited toolkit is often a sign of a simple character. Like Ike only has a few moves that are really strong, right? If those few moves cover a lot of options, then counterplay becomes very boring and very unfun. Because there's nothing to learn about the matchup. The way you win is by reading the opponent. So at that point, why would you play that game specifically? And that's just my opinion. So yeah, they could be predictable, but if the option is strong enough, then that predictability doesn't matter as much.
It's just going ham. That was.
Of course it's Daigo. Of course it's Daigo.
I think he's going for the record.
This nerf was clever because it gave the player a new way to express themselves at the cost of some damage and safety. In contrast, if we look at Ryu's Shoryuken nerf for Season 2 of Street Fighter V, they just removed his ability to do a meterless invincible uppercut.
Fuck Street Fighter V.
They actually removed every move like this from the game, which caused some controversy. Predictably, the most common reaction to this was about balance. You often hear things like, "Welcome to what it's like to be Guile," or "Ryu is dead." But what about its impact on the game's fun? Did this nerf make the game more exciting? Did it make for more creative strategies? Did this allow the player to express themselves in new ways? It might have helped balance the game by making the characters more similar to each other, but as for, balance is worthless by itself. Pro player Infiltration actually benefited from this nerf, but still disagreed with it because he felt it made the game less exciting.
무적 시간을 그렇게 조정한 거는 좀 스파 역사를 확 바꿔버리는 좀 개인적으로 마음에 안 드는 변경점이고.
If you look at updates to fighting games,
he didn't say it was less exciting, by the way, but I mean, sure. I feel like those type of nerfs are bad, but he still hasn't told me why we should buff more than nerf, honestly.
Your typical supers, ultras, and ultimates, characters end up overall with more options and more abilities, not the other way around. With more characters and more mechanics, it starts to look like a nightmare for balance. But
True.
you also have more ways to solve problems. A hard matchup can seem more manageable if you can choose from more specials, ultras, or isms.
True.
And people like seeing their characters do cool new stuff. Because hard nerfing and taking away abilities can be so depressing and kill the excitement, I feel it should be reserved for extreme cases or creative nerfs that can actually make the game more enjoyable. And even in games that don't get balance patches.
So I think he doesn't really talk about how some characters are just not fun to play against, and how a nerf, like he's talking about creative nerfs to make it more fun. But there's a lot more than just creative nerfs that can make something more fun. And I feel like any competitive game needs to have enough clear strengths and weaknesses. Like if it's asymmetric, that is, enough defined strengths and weaknesses to make, to really enjoy playing as a unique character. Not fun to play against is subjective though, right? Yeah, I mean, I said that before. I think like my opinion is my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right, and you're entitled to your opinion. But I think it's about keeping the character's playstyle intact, though. Yeah, so I agree with that. So I think a character starts, in game design, a character often starts with a power fantasy. So a power fantasy is basically, what would this character do in an optimal scenario? So the power fantasy for Ryu is being able to, like, deal with every character. And a power fantasy for Sheik is to be really fast and pressure and just, go in all the time and be able to dominate in that kind of regard, right? And then you got to figure out, okay, so what are their strengths and weaknesses? How do you make the character achieve that power fantasy? So that's the strengths. And then what are the costs for that power fantasy? So that's the weaknesses. And when the weaknesses are insignificant, then you only have the power fantasy. So nerfing, by decreasing the strengths, can be a thing if the strengths are too overbearing. So in Smash Ultimate, for example, I feel like Peach has a decently defined weakness in her movement speed, even though I think it's not really too much of a weakness. And then her range, which I don't think is too much of a weakness either, but they are there and they're pretty decently defined. But I think her strength is so overbearing that these weaknesses don't really matter. And I think the same is kind of true for Shulk. So Shulk has very clear weaknesses in his startup and stuff like that. His cooldowns on his Monados. But because his tools are so strong, those weaknesses matter a lot less than they should. So if you want to nerf these characters, making their weaknesses even worse is going to make them extremely binary characters. So for characters like that, you just have to take away some of their strength. But then there are characters like Joker and Pikachu, who are more of more characters that have very balanced strength and weaknesses, in the sense that they have a lot of strengths and very few weaknesses, so they're very well-rounded characters. And in those scenarios, I would focus on increasing their weaknesses more, so making them a little bit more, vulnerable, so to say. So that's my opinion.
And make rules if things get really unbalanced anyways. Regardless, it turns out people still enjoyed Marvel 2 with its infinites and Melee with wobbling. The reality is, a broken game can still be fun, while a perfectly balanced game might not even be touched. Even as the target of nerfs by multiple basketball leagues, George Mikan was a big proponent of a buff that players like him could never benefit from. He wanted basketball to have a three-point line because it would give smaller players a chance to score and open up the defense to make the game more enjoyable for the fans. In 1979, the NBA added the three-point line, and Mikan got exactly what he predicted. Let me know in the comments how you think balance changes should be done, or for this video.
Right, so I think we pretty much touched upon what my opinions are on balancing. I think his videos tend to stray a little bit from his points because he wants to touch upon a lot of different subjects. But I get his point, and I feel like it's nuanced wrong. I don't think the video is incorrect. I feel like the nuance is somewhere else. See, this is bullshit, because when everyone is super, you're not having fun. So this is like, so imagine playing Dragon Ball FighterZ, right? And this is why Dragon Ball FighterZ is unfun. So this is why Dragon Ball FighterZ is unfun. Because everyone has Super Dash, and Super Dash is such a good move that because it's so good, people start playing super defensively. And it takes away all the offense from the game. You know when Dragon Ball FighterZ is most fun? When it's a 1v1. Because then Super Dash becomes way weaker of a move, because there's no assists. And suddenly the game becomes a lot more tense. So making a character too strong, unlike the win conditions, so in other ways, in the way that they aggress, actually does the opposite, and it doesn't make the game faster, it often makes the game slower. So the same happened with Marvel 3, when it started dying, is because people would cancel block stun with X Factor, and get a touch of death into an incoming mix-up, into another incoming mix-up, and oftentimes the first two characters were all within the time period of one X Factor. It just became less fun. Why would you hit a block when, as soon as you hit a block, you can unreactably get a touch of death, which is just stupid. JoJo actually is pretty fun, except the top tiers. I don't like the top tiers at all. So yeah, a lot of these people kind of just memeing around, so...